Hey everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Innovation for a Circular Economy, Learning from the Clean Growth Journey. It's such a pleasure to have you all here today. So just wanted to thank you on behalf of everyone at Smart Prosperity Institute. I'm Alice Irene Whitaker, the Director of Communications here at Smart Prosperity Institute, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to my esteemed colleagues who will be the speakers for today. But first, I wanted to acknowledge the land that I personally stand on in these COVID times. Of course, we're all on different land and in different time zones, but I would like to acknowledge personally that I'm on the Anishinaabe and Algonquin land and invite you to personally acknowledge where you find yourself as well. Today's webinar explores a report recently published here at Smart Prosperity Institute. We are a national research network and policy think tank based out of the University of Ottawa. We deliver world-class research and we work with public and private partners, all to advance practical policies and market solutions for a stronger and cleaner economy. You can check out the website and sign up for a newsletter. There's in-depth research and analysis on a wide array of critical leading edge topics from our institute as well as from our research network around the world and here in Canada. As I mentioned, I'm pleased to introduce you to my colleagues for today's conversation. Stephanie Cairns is the Director of Circular Economy here at SPI and co-author of the report in question. She sits on the expert panel on circular economy of the Canadian Council of Academies and served on the Plastics Advisory Group to Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. As the director of our Circular Economy program here, she leads research of the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition, and she manages research programs here at SPI on sectoral circular economy strategies and the role of primary materials in the emerging circular economy. She has over 30 years of experience on climate, environment, and economic issues. I won't tell you about everything that she's done in her prestigious career so far, but thanks for being here today, Stephanie, with us. Sonia, Cyrus, Patel is a research associate who joined the Smart Prosperity Institute in 2019, and we're so lucky to have her here. Her research interest includes circular economy, obviously, sustainable finance, and valuation of ecosystem services. She focuses on global policy approaches to support the circular economy and was the lead researcher and co-author along with Stephanie of this report that we're discussing today. Before this, she worked in India as a research associate where she delivered projects in the areas of climate change, green growth, and sustainable development. She holds a master's in environmental economics and climate change from the London School of Economics. So welcome, Sonia. And finally, Geoff McCarney is our research director here at SPI. He has coordinated more than 20 major research conferences, symposia, workshops, and events over the past 5 years involving leading Canadian and international academics, policymakers from federal, provincial, and municipal governments, private sector participants, and civil society representatives to support the knowledge mobilization efforts of the grants and partnerships of these institutes, all while also catalyzing new research programs and initiatives. And he's the assistant professor of environment and development in the School of International Development and Global Studies and holds a PhD in sustainable development from Columbia University. So before I turn it over to them, just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. In the hour ahead, Stephanie will be laying out the big picture context for everyone. Sonia will explore the report in greater detail. And then Geoff will be our discussant, leading a conversation with Sonia and Stephanie and taking questions from all of you as well. So throughout the discussion, if you have any questions that come to mind that you would love to discuss with the speakers today, just feel welcome to drop them into the Q&A. And you can also upvote some of the questions that are already there if there's anything that resonates with you. And a quick note, as you probably see, that we are recording so that anyone who can't join us in real time can watch later. So please enjoy the conversation. Thank you all for being here, and over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Alice Irene, and thank you to all of you joining us today. I'm just going to share our screen, and Alice Irene, could you just confirm that this is being seen well?
Looks great. Good to go.
Awesome. Thank you. So our goal with our new publication, Innovation for a Circular Economy, is to kickstart a more holistic discussion of the full suite of public policies needed to support innovation for a circular economy in Canada. And in doing this, we're looking to cross-seminate between two of Smart Prosperity Institute's main program lines, our program on clean growth and our program on circular economy. Over the past year, initiatives such as the Canada-wide Action Plan on Zero Plastic Waste and events such as the World Circular Economy Forum have generated a noticeable growth in awareness of the circular economy in Canada and interest in this vision, which is for a sustainable, productive economy based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in their highest and best use, and regenerating natural systems. Now, transitioning towards the circular economy presents both a tremendous innovation challenge and opportunity. It's going to require broad-based, system-wide transformation and new technologies, products, business practices, and approaches to generating economic growth. Innovation and transformation, at least on the scale of what we are looking at in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Arguably, it's taken more than 2 decades for Canada to evolve the full ecosystem of policies and programs, which are now supporting our low carbon transition goal. So the question we posed ourselves is, how can we accelerate that timeline as we look to develop the policies and programs to support the journey to circularity? The good news is that Canada begins this journey with 2 strong advantages. First, the circular economy is gaining traction worldwide, allowing us the opportunity to learn from the experience and the policy experimentation of jurisdictions much further along on this journey. And second, although public policy to support a circular economy is still at an emergent phase in Canada, and we have yet to develop the type of integrated, comprehensive circular economy visions, strategies, and collaboration that are present in many countries. There is a scattering of very exciting initiatives being launched in Canada. For example, the Guelph Wellington Our Food Futures project, the City of Vancouver's strategy to be a zero waste community by 2040, the transition to an extended producer responsibility model for Ontario's Blue Box system, or notably the explicit circular economy approach that underpins the Canada-wide Action Plan on Zero Plastic Waste. We also have a strong set of pre-existing policies and programs to support clean innovation, although few of these currently are explicitly including a circular economy perspective. So our question was, how can we leverage all of this context in other areas to accelerate the development of the full suite of public policies to support innovation for a circular economy in Canada? So our report aims to lay a foundation for a discussion on this by 1, looking to the research on clean innovation to understand the range of policies and programs needed to stimulate circular innovation. 2, summarizing the emerging global menu of circular economy policies and programs and spotlighting leading international examples. And 3, highlighting strengths, opportunities, and gaps in the emerging Canadian circular economy policy landscape. Now, our intention is very much to prompt further discussion on how to broaden and strengthen the support for circular innovation in Canada. Just as we've learned over the last 2 decades that a carbon price, while necessary, is far from what will be sufficient for achieving a low carbon transition, so too will tools such as extended producer responsibility policies or green procurement need to be complemented with a much fuller ecosystem of programs and policies for circular innovation. And that's what we're looking to explore and initiate a discussion on. So with that, I invite my colleague Sonia to present her research on this. Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you for that great introduction, Stephanie. And with that, I'd like to now take everyone through some of the key findings of our research. But before we get into what is the policy suite required to drive circular economy innovation, let us first establish what we mean by this. Today, our world is less than 9% circular. And that means that of all the material used in the global economy, less than 9% are secondary materials. Now, to get this number up, we are going to have to change pretty much everything. We are going to have to change how we design products, how we manufacture, how we sell and use our materials, products, and services. This represents a tremendous innovation opportunity. Now, this innovation cuts across all sectors, so including everything from extraction to consumption to waste management. It's of many different types, going far beyond technology innovation to, for example, product design innovation. 80% of a product's impact is determined at the design stage. Process innovation, creating new processes that reduce materials, emissions, hazardous substances. New business models like offering products as a service. And very importantly, social innovation that creates the new behaviors and lifestyles that are going to be more circular. We also need this innovation to take place at different scales. For example, it's not enough to make a new vehicle design using bioplastics. We need to change our whole transportation system in order to make it more sustainable. So we need system level innovation over here. And finally, we're going to need policy innovation to make all of the above a reality. Next slide, please. So the first question that often comes up is, if circular economy outcomes are so desirable, why aren't we seeing more of them happening already? And there's two reasons for this. The first is the presence of market failures that hamper innovation. And the second is the presence of numerous barriers that arise because of the very nature of a circular economy. Let's look at the market failures first. The first one here is the knowledge spillover market failure. Now, this one is well documented to affect all types of innovation. Essentially, it's a phenomenon where when a researcher discovers a new idea, their findings, either partly or in full, may spill over to other researchers, so they aren't fully able to capture the rewards of their discovery. The second market failure is the environmental externality market failure. Now, this one impacts innovation more, of the innovation that strives for better environmental outcomes. And that's because many of the benefits that this type of innovation produces has no market value. And as a result, there's little demand for it and little profit incentive to develop it. Like I said, in addition to these market failures, there also exists a host of barriers that are specific to a circular economy. And I won't go into describing all of them, but just to highlight a couple, they include things like having inadequate research, technology barriers, access to affordable capital, an inherently tilted playing field towards virgin materials, missing data and metrics, and behavioral inertia, which is just another way of saying that we're so used to our life in a linear economy today that it's really difficult for us to break out of our learned patterns and transition into any other type of model. So now, given the presence of these market failures and barriers, it is clear that a wide range of strong and timely government action is going to be required in order to create the enabling conditions where a circular economy can thrive. Now, as Stephanie mentioned, such action is not unprecedented in Canada. Over a span of 2 years, the government has put in place numerous policies and programs to foster a low carbon economy. The framework you see before you here was informed by over 5 years of research done by the Smart Prosperity Institute to understand exactly what policies are going to be required to drive clean innovation for a low carbon economy. And it identifies 4 clusters of policies. First, we have push policies. Now, these focus on the early stages of innovation to generate new ideas. They generally do one of 2 things. Either they incentivize private research, or they supplement private research with government research through funding for government labs and universities. At the other end of the spectrum, we have what is known as pull policies. Now, these generate market demand for innovation that might otherwise not appear to be profitable, again, given that I said there's little market reward for solving environmental issues. Now, in order to be effective, both of these need to be applied simultaneously. And while both are super necessary, they aren't quite sufficient on their own. Supplementing these, we have 2 other clusters of policies. The first is grow policies that act as a sort of bridge between push and pull. They take promising innovation from the R&D stage to the point where they're ready for market deployments, and they do this by providing financial and technical support. And finally, pulling all of these together, we have strengthened policies. Now, these support the system as a whole in order to make it more efficient and resilient. And they include things like, for example, setting a vision, strengthening public institutions, building partnerships, investing in new skills, measuring key performance indicators, and ensuring all-round accountability. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see a couple of examples of what these policies look like for a low carbon economy. And while starting our CE work, we wanted to know what would we find if we went looking for similar examples in the circular economy realm. What is already underway? What could easily be adapted? And what is still the key gap in Canada's circular economy policy agenda? And in the next couple of slides, I'll present what we found. Starting with push policies. Now, these policies focus on the early stages of the innovation range to drive new ideas through research and development. Now, this research, whether conducted by academics, entrepreneurs, businesses, or governments, creates the intellectual property that then gets refined through subsequent stages before potentially becoming a commercial success. So it's really where the whole innovation chain begins. However, due to the knowledge spillover market failure that I just mentioned, we're seeing a lot less optimal levels of R&D taking place today. And that's why we need more government support in this area. What we know from Canada's clean innovation journey is that due to the interdisciplinary nature and broad applicability of clean innovation, this market failure tends to affect clean innovation far more than other forms of innovation. Evidence also suggests that the impact of push policies goes beyond the R&D stage, up until, in fact, the stages of deployment and diffusion. So by actually deploying push policies, the governments can really energize the innovation system as a whole, making them all the more important. So what do these look like in the real world? An excellent example of push policies is the European Union's Horizon 2020 program. Now, this program is the biggest research and innovation program in Europe with a budget of something like 80 billion euros for a 6-year period starting from 2014 to 2020. And in 2018, the final phase of this program identified the circular economy as a focus area, in part to support EU circular package. And it did this with a budget of 1 billion euros. This has funded projects related to waste and resource management, closed loop manufacturing, the circular bioeconomy, amongst so many others. And in 2020, in fact, they topped up this funding with an additional 60 million euros as part of the European Green Deal call. And these figures really just highlight how seriously other jurisdictions are taking the transition to a circular economy, and also points to why many of them are so much further ahead in their transition. So what did we find when we went looking for push policies for a circular economy in Canada? Now, in general, I'd say push policies are well underway in Canada. Canada has a vibrant research ecosystem and is internationally renowned for its research institutions. Much of this is credited to public support. In 2018, for example, the government announced $4 billion of funding for our 3 granting councils. And I want to highlight here that the advantage of government research centers is that they can take a far more long-term view compared to private research. For example, today, Canada is a leader in quantum computing, and that has a lot to do with NRC's early efforts to develop this expertise. Unfortunately, we found little government funding is earmarked for a circular economy today, and there are no dedicated government research institutions or programs with an explicit circular economy mandate. There are, however, some relevant research programs taking place, and a good example here is NRCan's Mining Value from Waste pilot, which is being undertaken by their CanMet lab and is part of a larger research initiative. Moving on to university research now, another big Canadian strength. In fact, Canada's higher education expenditure as a share of GDP has consistently been well above the OECD average. Here again, our scan found that not too much activity is happening on a circular economy. We did find one international bibliometric study looking at the number of articles and citations on a circular economy, and they ranked Canada a pretty low 19. One notable exception here is the ADEC Institute in Quebec, and it's a relatively new institute, but it has done a really fantastic job in cultivating a circular economy ecosystem in Quebec. Finally, I'll stress here that increasing research efforts is only one part of the solution. Given the scale of the challenge we have before us, we also need to focus on how to better connect our various research efforts in order to increase both output and their impact. Again, this is happening to some extent already, and a great example here is the Canadian Plastic Science Agenda, but we do need to be seeing a lot more of this type of collaboration to push the transition forward. I'll end this section by saying that while we're not seeing a lot of CE push policies, we do have a robust set of research institutions and granting programs that are already in place, which can easily be leveraged for more circular economy related research. Moving on now to pull policies. Pull policies are really key to create the right market signals in the economy that stimulate demand for new products and services. And we need these because, like I said, our markets don't currently reflect the full cost of environmental damage. And since we don't pay these costs, there is little profit incentive to develop solutions that might mitigate this damage. From the clean innovation journey, we know that these policies not only result in better environmental outcomes, but also do a really great job in incentivizing innovation. And if it so happens that this innovation reduces the cost of achieving that environmental outcome, it also creates a competitive advantage. So they're a bit of a win-win-win situation. A real-world experience has shown that for these policies to be effective, they need to be designed in a way that's stringent, flexible, and predictable. So in other words, the most effective policies tend to be those that are ambitious, not overly prescriptive, and are set over a longer time horizon. Now, during our scan, we found that most of Canada's current circular economy portfolio falls under this cluster, making it the dominant cluster of tools that we currently use. And of all of these, extended producer responsibility is by far the most cited one. Like Stephanie hinted earlier, EPR seems to be to the circular economy what carbon pricing is to the low carbon economy. Now, Canada has seen some form of producer responsibility in place since the early 1980s, most of which at that point was product stewardship models. Only more recently, and in accordance to Canada's action-wide plan for EPR, have most provinces started to transition to more full EPR programs. And that is to say, where producers are given full responsibility of the financial and physical responsibility for managing their product's end-of-life stage. Unfortunately, evidence suggests that while these have been successful in increasing recycling and waste diversion rates, they haven't quite resulted in more upstream innovation, for example, like product design. And this may be because of the way that they're designed. What we currently have in Canada is a provincial patchwork of product stewardship, partial EPR, and full EPR programs that cover different materials and use different definitions, different reporting mechanisms and governance structures. And this isn't quite conducive for innovation. What we need to do here is really modernize and harmonize our various EPR programs to ensure that we're getting the most bang out of our buck. And I believe the CCMA is already taking steps in this direction. I'll add here that with the proliferation of product as a service, there's also a new enhanced concept taking hold called product ownership. Now, this is where producers are given responsibility not only for their end of life management, but also act as owners of the products throughout their life. And it is worth thinking about what kind of incentives we might be putting in place to accelerate this kind of practice. Next slide, please. Now, while important, EPR is not the only form of regulation that can be put in place for a circular economy. The second most common type of regulation we found in the circular economy literature was that related to waste management. Now, this includes things like landfill bans, bag limits, where you restrict the quantity of waste collected, mandatory recovery from certain sectors, regulations to better manage hazardous substances, among others. Now, despite having a really robust waste management system in Canada, we are today responsible for a very high per capita waste generation. So we really could benefit from better regulation here. Lately, more and more landfill bans have started cropping up at the local and provincial levels. Nova Scotia is the leader here with a disposal ban on 21 different items. And of course, we have to acknowledge the recent federal ban on 6 types of single-use plastics. But going beyond these, we also need more upstream regulations, like those related to product design, product material composition, the way products are labeled, and extended warranties for products. And all of this still remains a big regulatory gap in Canada. Pricing instruments are next. Now, compared to regulations, pricing instruments generally are considered to be more flexible and more cost-effective. They also generate revenues for governments, which can then be used to create further benefits. Some key pricing tools we found for a circular economy are taxes and fees on waste disposal, differential pricing for different types and quantities of materials going to landfill. So for example, setting a higher price for materials that are more difficult to manage or for materials that have a higher recycling possibility. Taxes and fees to discourage the use of virgin materials, and tax incentives to encourage more repair, reuse, and recycling. And I'll highlight here a really cool policy from Sweden. Now, to encourage more repair, Sweden has introduced a 50% reduction in their value-added tax for repair related to activities for certain products such as apparel, bicycles, and white goods. To top that off, they also allow for half the labor cost of repairs to be claimed back from income tax. And I think it would be really great to have something like that in Canada. So what pricing instruments do we have today? Canada has historically seen a low use of environmental taxes. Like other OECD countries, most of our environmental taxes are related to energy use. Waste pricing is fairly limited here, with only a few municipalities adopting pay-as-you-throw programs, for example. Even in the commercial sector, where disposal pricing is more prominent, we're seeing that the tipping fee is often set at lower than optimal rates. Also, and now research on this is a little outdated, but it does suggest that in Canada, tax incentives favor virgin materials over recycled ones. And that's again something that we might want to look into. The key takeaway here is that for a circular economy to flourish, we need to completely rethink our fiscal policies. We should be striving to tax less of what we want more of, like labor, and tax more what we want less of, like waste and pollution. And this idea is now being propagated by so many international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, the ILO, and the OECD. In fact, one study found that by shifting taxes from labor to pollution in Europe, they could actually increase their GDP by 2% while reducing greenhouse gases by 8%. Again, something to think about. Moving on now to public procurement. Now, procurement is another really powerful tool to stimulate the circular economy. To give you a sense of just how powerful, in Canada, public procurement accounts for 13% of our GDP. Now, this tool is great not only because it helps create a demand for circular solutions, but it also allows governments to lead by example and offer a testbed for new innovations. Canada has had a green procurement policy in place since 2006. However, currently, this policy focuses more on reducing greenhouse gases, hazardous substances, and plastics, and doesn't include more circular considerations, like, for example, having more recycled goods, or those which have a higher recycled material content. Evidence also suggests that this policy is far from achieving its potential. In fact, a recent study that analyzed 50 requests for proposals of over $1 million found that 22% had no mention of sustainability whatsoever, and only 12% had sustainability as an evaluation criteria. It is encouraging to see here that local jurisdictions are taking a lead. For example, the City of Toronto has committed to adopting circular procurement as a major tool to achieve its aspirational goal of becoming a more circular city. Again, the key takeaway here is that we need to strengthen our green procurement policy and integrate circular economy considerations into it. And since it's a policy that's already in place, it represents one of the lower hanging fruits of opportunity. So moving on now to grow policies. So these sit between push and pull. They're super important because research suggests that governments don't just have a role in fixing markets. They can in fact co-create and shape them in order to achieve public goals. They can do this by providing financial and technical support to grow businesses, both equally important because without such support, many good ideas perish or fall into what is known as the valley of death. Canada's clean innovation journey tells us that it's really difficult for clean tech firms to secure debt and equity in Canada. And in fact, many of Canada's large lenders are still hesitant about investing in them due to a perceived lack of market maturity or profitability issues. As a result, many of these businesses don't end up converting into commercial successes. Or when they do it by seeking funding elsewhere, thereby creating jobs and wealth in other countries. So we really need to tackle this problem because if we don't, we risk missing out on the full benefits and returns on the public money that we're putting into our push policies. I'll highlight a great example of grow policies here, and that's the Green Deal program in the Netherlands. Now, this is a highly collaborative program where organizations, which can be either a business, industry association, or an NGO, is invited by the government to outline their business idea, the barrier that stands in their way, and a potential solution. And if the government thinks it's a good idea, they sign what is known as a Green Deal to work with that organization from anywhere between 2 to 3 years. And during this time, they'll do an intensive legal assessment of both national and EU laws, and then try to remove the regulatory and legislative obstacles that are hampering the market uptake of that idea. The success of this program has shown that just by having a responsive and collaborative approach, and by bringing together relevant stakeholders, many barriers can actually be overcome without the need for having financial incentives. So another great model for Canada to consider. Now, similar to push policies, we found that in the case of grow policies, there are multiple programs and funds in Canada already in place to support new businesses. Again, some good examples here are the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, which gives clean tech firms funding for development and pre-commercial demonstration, and the more recent Green Growth Hub, which acts as a focal point for clean tech firms to understand exactly what government programs and services that they can avail. Unfortunately, again, none of these seem to have an explicit circular economy mandate. And this is important because like clean tech firms, circular businesses also struggle with accessing affordable capital, albeit for different reasons. Circular businesses are usually smaller scale setups than clean tech firms, and they also employ novel business ideas. Now, take, for example, the concept of product as a service. This would have a very different risk profile than the more established model of product ownership. I'll end the section again with the key takeaway that while we're not seeing a lot of circular economy grow policies currently in place, we do have numerous funds, numerous initiatives and programs already set up for the clean tech sector, which either could be modified for a circular economy or on which new circular economy programs could be modeled. Finally, I'll come to our last cluster of strengthen policies. Now, as you saw, push, pull, and grow policies mentioned above all seem to target specific market failures and barriers. There are, however, some barriers that are more pervasive throughout the system. Take, for instance, the barrier of incomplete information or the lack of data. Now, this is true for all stages of the innovation change across geographies, across sectors, and across stakeholders. Another example is policy incongruency, which simply refers to giving out mixed policy signals. And of course, the go-to example over here is simultaneously having a carbon tax and at the same time giving out billions of dollars worth of subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. So strengthened policies address barriers like this, and they help build an overall more effective and resilient ecosystem. Getting into what these are, one of the most important strengthened policies is to actually first set a vision. Transitioning to a circular economy is a mammoth challenge, and it has so many different elements that it really calls for having a federal holistic vision. Such a vision would need to be accompanied by bold and inclusive strategies, which are created in collaboration with all the concerned stakeholders and take into consideration the needs of the many different sectors and geographies in Canada. We already are seeing some such strategies in place for relevant areas that could feed into a larger circular economy strategy. For example, we have the Canada-wide strategy on zero plastic waste and the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan, which actually envisions a circular economy where mine waste can be transformed into a resource. Now, such a vision is going to need to be supported by strong, nimble, and risk-tolerant public institutions that can drive the government's agenda throughout the innovation process. And we've seen throughout the world that circular economy policies have been driven by pioneering public institutions. In Finland, for example, Sitra, which is the Finnish Innovation Fund, is the catalyst of the country's circular economy transition. Now, while in Canada, we don't have any public institutions which have a specific circular economy mandate. Sorry, Stephanie, you need to change the slide. One more, please. Sorry, one behind. Yeah. So while we don't have public institutions in place that have a specific circular economy mandate, we do have, many of them have the potential to include a circular economy related work stream into their ongoing programs of work around clean innovation. And some examples of this could be the NRC, the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, Business Development Canada, or maybe even the Clean Growth Hub. Now, while we've gone through a lot of actions that the government needs to take, the transition to a circular economy, of course, cannot be achieved by government action alone. It will require efforts by multiple players and partnerships with researchers, small and large businesses, private finance, and consumers. This is really going to be the key to push the transition forward, and it can take many different types of forms, for example, in this industrial symbiosis, research and development clusters, and even voluntary industry initiatives. Today, Canada does have some civil society and business-led partnerships, but these tend to be less mature than many at the international level. Some of the prominent CE partnerships in Canada are the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition, the National Zero Waste Council, and the previously mentioned ADEC Institute. Okay, additionally, the circular economy will undoubtedly create a new demand for skills. Now, this will vary across sectors, geographies, and stages of the transition. It will include things like technical skills for repairing, soft skills for collaborating across different sectors, and really sharp business skills. Also, financial institutions are going to need to develop skills in order to both better understand the circular economy and provide innovative financial solutions to meet its unique demands. Now, there isn't too much research in this area, and a lot more research is required in order to determine exactly how the circular economy might impact jobs in the future and the exact set of skills that might be required to support these jobs. Last, but certainly not the least, we come to monitoring and accountability. Now, when we set visions, accountability for achieving these is going to depend on monitoring actions. And monitoring is going to depend on having good data. As the old saying goes, you cannot manage what you don't measure. So far, there isn't a universally recognized indicator of circularity. And because of the breadth of the circular economy, there are endless possibilities of indicators that can measure it. Usually at the macro level, material flow analysis is used to study trends in resource and waste flows, but these don't really convey information about the products in which the materials are used. And so for a complete circular economy picture, we need to have a lot more information than this. Again, Canada doesn't currently have a circular economy monitoring framework. It does, however, measure several relevant indicators, like, for example, the amount of waste generated at the household level. But in order to create more informed policy decisions and track the decision, Canada is going to need to start collecting data on many more circular metrics. And I'll highlight here the European Union's circular economy monitoring framework. Now, this one actually has 10 indicators grouped into 4 different aspects of the circular economy, including production and consumption, waste management, secondary raw materials, and competitiveness and innovation. And it includes indicators like, for example, the amount of different types of waste generated, the recycling rates of these wastes, the share of secondary materials in the total material demand, the number of people employed in the circular economy. And what's important to note here is that even before this framework was put into place, many of these indicators were actually already being tracked. But by putting them together, the Eurostat is able to tell a far more complete picture of how the circular economy is progressing in Europe. I'll end here by saying that while we're seeing a lot of different initiatives taking place in different contexts, much of the strengthened policies that can string all of these together and build on them to create a critical mass of effort are yet to be put in place in Canada. And with that, I'll hand it over back to Stephanie to make some concluding remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Sonia. And what a challenge to distill all of your research into that short presentation. I know it was quite a struggle. And Sonia had to leave out so many details and dozens of examples that she's collected. So please do download our report to get much more detail on what she's summarized. We have some initial observations to share arising from this research. The journey towards a circular economy presents a tremendous innovation challenge. Its emphasis on material efficiency and the cycling of secondary materials is distinctive from the current focus on low carbon innovation, which is really the underpinning of Canada's clean growth agenda. And as such, it's going to require specific policies and programming. These need to support a materials focus and also innovations in things such as product design, production processes, supply chain systems, consumption attitudes, new business models, approaches also, which hopefully will offer the next tranche of emission reductions. We see that push, grow, and strengthen policies are going to be needed to complement the pull policies such as EPR, regulatory, pricing, and procurement, which have to date been the main focus of initiatives and recommendations for Canada's emerging circular economy policy agenda. So while public policy to support the circular economy is still at an emerging stage in Canada, there are small pockets of initiatives emerging. We can leverage 2 strong advantages: the opportunity to learn from international experience and the 2 decades that we have invested in building a strong set of pre-existing policies and programs to support clean innovation. With the shift towards a circular economy underway globally, Canada can't afford to be lagging in embracing strategies with so much potential to reconcile economic growth with ecological limits, to boost competitive advantage and to create jobs, to improve equity and social well-being, to attract green investment, and to diversify the economy. Fortunately, the insights and the lessons learned along our journey to a robust ecosystem of programs supporting the transition to a low-carbon economy can be used to accelerate the development of policies and programs to support a circular economy. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for joining us. We're really welcoming your thoughts and questions in the beginning of a discussion on this. And over to you, Geoff, for our discussion and Q&A session.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Sonia, for a really informative and interesting presentation. I can say as research director here at Smart Prosperity Institute, these kind of reports are really helping open a conversation with our broader network of researchers and policy experts about how we need to think about the policy needs and the research background that's required differently if we're considering the need to transition not only to a low carbon, but also to a circular resource efficient economy. And it's leading to a range of really rich conversations that I'm having with our academics and partners, and which I'm interested in continuing here through this webinar as well. I'm starting to see a few questions pop up on our Q&A. I invite other participants, if you have questions, please feed them into the Q&A session. I'll try to pick up on a few in the time that we have left. And I believe you can also vote or support other questions if you'd like those prioritized, and I'll do my best to get to them. Since we have a few there, I might go to the questions that are listed already. And I think the first one was posted. It's a question about, is there any research around the public perception of moving towards a circular economy? And is there anything known about the receptivity or resistance to shifting to such an economy? And so I open that back up to Stephanie and Sonia. Stephanie, I think you've unmuted, so I'll go to you first.
Ken, I'm not familiar with any specific polling or research on that in Canada. What I would say is I'd be very hesitant to initiate that right now because I actually think we haven't yet framed the public conversation around a circular economy in Canada. And there's a very high risk that people would jump to inaccurate conclusions about what that means. I think that we know that at, say, the household level, there's huge support for instance, the plastics agenda that's been introduced. So on an issue by issue basis, there may well be strong support for these initiatives. But the broader concept of circular economy, I think, is still being introduced into the broader public discourse. And we'd want to really lay the ground very carefully for that as a first step.
Thank you. Sonia, did you want to feed in there? I see your microphone is open.
I'll just add there, Geoff, that I am also not aware of any sort of research happening in this space, but there is a lot of perception problems that are acting as barriers to the circular economy. One of them is the perception of just abundance in Canada. We seem to have this perception that we have unlimited amounts of land available for landfills and an abundance of metals and materials available for Canada to use. So maybe this isn't quite a Canadian problem yet. And that is really not true. And what we're going to need to see going forward, and yeah, so just to say that there is a perception problem over here, and there isn't research on this available yet, but probably should be.
Okay, thank you both. I see a number of more questions popping up. I think the next one that came up that's been upvoted a little bit was from Roger Peters, and it asks if a market development program like the feed-in tariff procurement program used to drive down the cost of renewable energy, I believe we've seen that, for instance, in the German Energy Wende program. Would that also work for circular economy procurement? Do we have thoughts on that from the report? Maybe Sonia, did we cover anything like that in the report that you remember?
No, we didn't actually, and I'm not quite familiar with this one. Stephanie, do you know?
Roger, I think it's a very interesting idea. One of the big challenges that we have, and I haven't seen that recommended anywhere in the CE literature, but if you think that one of the big challenges we have right now is how do we create a market for all the materials that we're now collecting? How do we basically introduce more incentives to use cycled materials in product development? And perhaps there's a concept such as feed-in tariff that would subsidize materials with secondary material content that could be developed. I haven't seen that in CE literature though, so it'd be a really interesting, policy development exercise to think about.
Yeah, that's interesting. It sounds similar in many ways to sort of renewable content standards, like you said, Stephanie, which raises different questions as well related to trade policy and what classifies as waste versus recycled content in trade material flows and things like that. That could be important questions to dive into. Another question I see from Derek Eaton. Does the EC Circular Economy Action Plan provide a relevant blueprint for Canada recognizing there are some similarities in terms of the federal system. I think that question about the federal system and jurisdictional questions, particularly on this report, as they relate to thinking about low carbon versus circular, if there's differences, how we think about that jurisdictionally, if you have comments on that.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Geoff. Um, just to say that maybe the circular economy action plan, it doesn't need to serve as a blueprint, but it does offer a lot of insight and a lot of examples that Canada can learn from, and that's true for other roadmaps that are being put into place in other jurisdictions as well. Just a little note here about the European context is that they're really coming from a resource importing country context versus Canada, which is more of a resource exporting context. And so while we can take relevant examples that work for Canada from these, we really need to start thinking about what's going to be working in our context, and not just for Canada as a whole. We have different geographies which are fairly different, and also so many different sectors that we need to figure out the model that fits best for us. But certainly there's lots of great examples in that task, in that action plan that we can learn from.
I'd add to that by saying that what you see in Europe is, different countries are taking the lead on different parts of the circular economy, but what the action plan has done is enabled kind of a common cross-cutting approach and vision and prioritization of the issue. And I think that in Canada, one of the challenges that we constantly hear about when we go and talk to, private sector who are trying to make stuff work on circular economy is the fragmentation of policies across Canada, not only between the federal and provincial levels, but also then even, between provincial and city levels. And until we can kind of try to get greater economies of scale, greater economies of scale of market, scale of ability to implement solutions by having a more harmonized or a more consistent approach across the country, it's going to be very difficult to tackle these large solutions. So I think that, what we can get from the EC action plan is, from the EU action plan is that it's very much, it's providing that common vision that enables kind of bolder action because it's working at very large scale.
Okay, thank you very much. I might try now to combine two questions I think are somewhat related. There's one question from Bart Robinson asking whether CE policies, have you in your review, have you seen whether CE policies in other countries ever include incentives or regulations to simply reduce levels of consumption as opposed to increasingly cycle materials? And maybe on top of that, as you go think about are there any indicators people use to track that kind of outcome, or describe other examples? Dive a little bit more into the report where you cover other examples of metrics for circular economy, which is a question from Ann Eastman. So, do they look at examples to reduce level of consumption? What other metrics are we seeing are used as well? If we have thoughts on either of those.
So I haven't seen too many incentives being put in place to reduce the level of consumption. I think this is the sort of thing that's more taken up by civil society. And for example, we see the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign, which is really focused on reducing food waste at a consumer level. It's been super successful in several different countries, and I believe is also in place in Canada. I'll speak a little bit about the different types of metrics that we need for a circular economy. And just to say that because this topic is so broad, there's sort of this endless list of metrics can be put in place for a circular economy. For example, in the case of push policies, we need more metrics on, for example, the number of circular economy related patents that companies are applying for, or the types of research that is taking place, the number of papers that are being published. In the case of grow policies, we need to have more metrics, for example, of how many businesses are really circular, how many people are they employing, what kind of finance are they able to attract, what is their share of the market. So many different metrics for different types of policies that are required. For pull policies, I'd say where we want to put in incentives for more repair and reuse, we should be looking at more metrics that are tracking how much of our household appliances, for example, are we actually putting in for repair versus buying new ones, or how much is the household spending on repair. So just the sort of list is endless. Again, for strengthened policies, how many partnerships do we have going in the country? What kind of partnerships are these? What are the different different policies that are what are the different policies that are taking place at the local and provincial levels. So there's so many different ways to sort of measure this. And like I said, there isn't a sort of universal indicator of circularity as yet.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, anything to add there or no? Okay, perfect. There's a question from Judith Keith, and if I'm understanding it correctly, I think she's asking, how do we quantify metrics such as a 9% circular supply chain? So when we say the world is 9% circular, what does that mean, and where is that data drawn from? Are you able to speak to that at all? Because I know that helps to frame our report.
So, Stephanie. Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Apologies, I should have yeah, Stephanie, please go.
I'll speak to that, Judith. I mean, it's interesting when you go in and look at the actual research report that very widely cited statistic comes from. It's a pretty crude assessment. They haven't looked at, 100 different material flows and added them up to look at 9%. They've looked at some of the largest material flows in the global economy. And these tend to be, things like, building materials, etc. So they've looked at the very largest flows to come to that 9%. What's interesting, though, is that when you kind of start to break down in other reports, for instance, in Canada on plastics, totally different study, totally different material being looked at, we're coming up to a very equivalent number in terms of, how much plastics are being cycled in the Canadian economy. And so while I think there's some sectors where that number is a bit higher, and you're certainly seeing countries that are really pushing on circular economy. For instance, in the Netherlands, that number has shifted up very significantly over the last half dozen years that they've been working on circular economy. It does seem to be a very relevant rule of thumb.
Okay, perfect, thank you. We're coming up to the end. I just wanted to put one more question to the panelists, just sort of as thinking about implementation and how we take this forward. It comes out very strongly in the report that we've had a strong emphasis, particularly on the low carbon stream, around pull policies, right? The type of pricing regulations need to transition to a low carbon economy. Given the different challenges that you've identified for circular, does that, clearly both on low carbon and circular, we should be broadening out to the range of push, pull, grow, and strengthen policies you identify. But are there any areas in particular where we should be really prioritizing policy implementation as we move towards circular as sort of a first step in policy development in this direction? Do either of the panelists have any final thoughts just on that implementation aspect before we wrap up for today? Stephanie,
I guess
if you'd
I'll
like
go
to.
first.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'll step up. I think that, it's a very complex new field that we're looking at. I've worked on low carbon issues for longer than I care to admit, about 25 years. And it took a long time for us to kind of understand the full, the full menu of what was going to be needed for a low carbon transition. I think we're at a very early stage of the discussion on circular economy, and what I would call the strengthen package is the most important place for us to move forward right now to generate the conversations, the alignment of vision, the collaboration and the partnerships, which then start to set the agenda for what's needed in, say, the push policies, what kind of research is needed, and start to develop the kind of collaborations and networks which enable the creation of new businesses, and start to establish what kind of pull policies are needed. So I would be looking to really, invest in the strengthen side, in increasing kind of the civil society conversation and shared vision and collaborations that then kind of cascade other initiatives out of them.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sonia, any final thoughts to add before we wrap up?
No, I'll just second Stephanie's recommendation here that it really all starts with having a vision. So that's really a step one before we do anything else. So that would be where my mode goes.
Okay, thank you both. It's been a really informative discussion. I wanted to thank all of our participants as well and our attendees. I know there were more questions that I could get to, but I really appreciate your participation and your engagement. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. We're pushing our research on this topic ahead, and look forward to addressing many of these questions that you're identifying. So thank you very much. We're approaching the top of the hour, so I'm going to pass it back quickly to Alice Irene, our communications director, just for some few final points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoff, and thank you, everyone. From all of us here at Smart Prosperity Institute, I want to thank everyone for your thought-provoking questions and for participating today, giving us your time. Thank you to Sonia and Stephanie and Geoff for your expertise and time as well. As mentioned, this is very much a nascent conversation, and we hope to continue it with you all over the months ahead. To that end, over the coming months, we actually have a series that will be ongoing called Circular Economy Global Sector Best Practices. This will have a chapter released every month focused on different sectors, starting with mining this month in a week or so. So watch out for that. And then we'll also be publishing chapters in the subsequent months focused on electronics, agri-food, construction, plastics, the bioeconomy, and the automotive industry. So I think this crowd will be interested. So do visit the website, sign up for the newsletter, and you can see the content that's coming out, the most up-to-date research and analysis. We also have a new bi-weekly podcast that provides fresh takes on current affairs, politics, research, and business of the clean economy. So come check out our website and our newsletter so that you can receive all of that fabulous content. And thank you all and have a really lovely day. Thanks for joining us.